Welcome to Alex and Annie, the Real Women of Vacation Rentals. I'm Alex,
And I'm Annie.
and we are back today for the August 1st of the month bonus episode, and joined by the one and only Simon Lehmann, co-founder and CEO of AJL Atelier. Simon, it's so good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise, Alex and Annie. And it's so funny that we're doing this for the 1st of August because 1st of August is Swiss National Day. So that's amazing.
Wow.
How do we celebrate Swiss National Day? Is that like our 4th of July?
Yeah, you have fireworks and,
Okay.
put some sausages on the grill. And we have big bonfires and kids walk around with lampions and we have fireworks. And so, yeah, it's
Oh
pretty
man, well, we
exciting.
didn't even come prepared, so now
I
I feel
know. I would have
bad.
had. Well, Simon, it's been actually a year since we had you on. We had you on this time last year, and we talked about the market and what was going on, the Airbnb bust. So that was the big conversation that was going on last year. But thought that this year we're looking at some challenges with some other channels. Specifically, VRBO has been the one that surprised some people, and wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's start. So last year we talked about the Airbnb bubble will burst. Well, it's a question of definition. Has it burst or has it not? But we've seen significant changes. And I think before I go directly into your question, we need to think about how has the whole market behaved in the last 12 months as well. And, we always said, put the umbrella out, rainy days will come, and we definitely see compression. We see compression ADR, we see compression on occupancy, we see a tougher market environment, which immediately affects the channels as well, right? So it definitely has a direct impact. And, comparing an Airbnb with the full service property management industry is always difficult because at the end of the day, the vast majority of their listings is still RBOs versus professionally managed listings. So we need to sort of separate that in the way we look at this market overall. But we've definitely seen some incredible challenges. And I think at the same time, the channels themselves, including Verbo, are, struggling to address these changes within the markets and put their efforts into the right markets where the demand is there and also supply. I mean, when we look at the overall supply levels, especially here in Europe as well, supply has grown significantly. And as soon as the demand only shrinks a little bit, we have compression on ADRs and occupancy. And I think 24 has clearly shown that. In England, the market has softened considerably. Croatia, other markets, it has become super hot as well. So I think companies like VRBO are definitely struggling to address these changing demand patterns and also supply models, number one. Secondly, I think VRBO Expedia is really still struggling with its own technology integration and making that work for their own best interest. And third, I think it's lack of focus, if you ask me.
Yeah. And I mean, the cost per acquisition to get a booking now is so much higher than it used to be years ago. And the competition is fierce. And I think, love it or hate it, Airbnb has done definitely the best job of defining their brand. They're still spending a ton of money on advertising, but people just naturally seek out Airbnb. And that never happened with Verbo. So I think it's very tough for these OTAs to still be able to maintain the level that they once were when now you've just got this behemoth. And on top of that, in Google, it's your organic listings have been pushed down so far because Google wants you to answer everything right there and be able to get everything without having to be able to click out. So it's a challenging thing for marketers of all sizes at this point.
Well, I also believe that Verbo still suffers from its own legacy. I mean, let's face it, HomeAway and all the brands that it had, right? And I'm talking about Europe, in every market, being it Fevo Direct in Germany, Abritel in France, and whatever. And, that takes ages to have that traffic sort of tucked into your own core brand and make that work for your own benefit. Also, in relation to what you said, Alex, in relation to Airbnb, and also for Booking.com, it has been easier. It's one brand, and that's what they marketed over years. And I would see the same force of Booking here in Europe. I mean, they're going exceptionally strong. That's where people book, and that's what people sort of are used to. And HomeAway slash Verbo had old brands in all the different countries, and integrating those and bringing the customers along with you on that journey, I think is also very challenging. So I think it's definitely a number of reasons why Verbo is not performing to the level that the professional property managers are expecting who are working with them.
So, what is
Yeah.
your thought on the diversification of distribution? So, Alex and I talked to a lot of people about it, and I think there's different approaches. In Europe, it's the people are more inclined to have a lot of channels and understand that you really want eggs in multiple baskets. And in the US, a lot of people have been very gun shy to go about trying more channels. It's like they've had their direct, they've had Airbnb or Verbo, and then they added another one. And they're really, really hesitant to add some of these like tier two channels that are coming on. So do you think there's too many channels, or do you think that like perhaps just specifically to the US that people need to be more open-minded to be adding channels?
Open-minded, Annie. It's an awesome question. And my answer basically goes back 20 years when I had the honor to enter this industry, becoming the CEO of Interhome. We had two channels at the time, right? We had travel agencies and we had the direct channel. That's it. And in 2007, we started to build relationships and started to integrate with OTAs. And we were the first large PMC that started to integrate with Booking.com and then followed by HomeAway and then TripAdvisor in 2008. And my credo or my strategy was always, and I always said that to the commercial guys, we need to make sure we're putting our eggs in as many baskets as we possibly can, right? In terms of distribution, we don't want to sit on the drip of a large OTA. And back then, obviously, we could not even imagine the power that they had. I mean, Booking was already very strong at that time, obviously, and HomeAway was just about to take off. 2006, 7 was just post the Verbo acquisition. So we could clearly see that the OTAs are an incredible opportunity for vacation rental because before you could not book a rental on an OTA. I mean, you could book flights and you could book hotels and rental cars, and that's it, right? So we brought this vertical to the online travel world, and I always said, hey, we need to make sure we're using as many channels as we can and balance that next to our own direct distribution strategy. And we need to be very mindful about our customer acquisition costs and balance those equally. 20 years forward, I will give you exactly the same answer. And I'm actually quite surprised, and still today, because we obviously do quite a bit of work in the US as well. We've done a lot of research on the markets and looked at the market in a broader aspect in relation to distribution. And I'm amazed that, we've seen some additional market entries got to go in the US, Holido, others have tried to come to the market. Booking.com still doesn't have more than 2% market share. It's doubling its share, but it's still in small numbers. And that is incredible for me to think about. Why are people not more open to multi-channel distribution? In Europe, this is totally common. When we talk to property managers on the consulting side in Europe, we always say you can't work with enough channels. Yes, they need to be managed either through the PMS or the channel manager. They need to work. You need to be thinking about, okay, who is my clientele? What is the persona of the customers I want to attract? Families, golfers, fishers, people with pets, you name it. And I think that's an incredible opportunity to serve as many channels as you can. And I say a booking is a booking, right? And obviously you don't need to put equal time into it. Sometimes it's even more commercially viable to use a certain channel versus others. So number one, yes, continue focusing on a direct booking, but use as many channels as I can. And I'm still surprised how significantly different the US market is, where people are more reluctant to drive a multi-channel strategy, whereas in Europe, this is totally common.
I think it really comes down to resources and time of the company. I know just being on the property management side, for many years at Condo World and now the clients that I represent is you can get burned really quickly when, an OTA comes to you and it sounds like this is going to be great and they, promise you the world and then you really don't get any sort of production from them. And working with the channel manager, of course, that simplifies the process to some extent, but it's still a lot of time on your staff to get these things set up. And if you're only getting a handful of bookings a year from a channel, it becomes a challenge of if you have a marketing team or a distribution manager and that's their job, I think, go at it, do it. Because from my perspective, it's also a big part of homeowner acquisition to be able to say that you're on all these channels. And even if you don't get bookings from them, that is still inherently very valuable, because these individual owners, they can't go out and do that. They can put their property on, maybe one or two channels, but they're not going to be on Homes and Villas and booking.com and all these other ones that, there's a level of sophistication with those. But I think it comes down to time. I think that's the main thing that I've seen, and what I've heard from other people is just the value of it versus the time to onboard and the stress of it.
No, I totally agree with you, Alex. But I think we need to be mindful about also to think that each channel addresses different type of personas in terms of clients and guests, and that's also booking behaviors. What is the booking window of an Airbnb customer to a Vrbo customer or to a booking.com customer? So I think you can leverage that in your own interest when you understand what are the different personas are who uses different channels. But I'm totally agreeing with you that you don't want to burden yourself with additional complexity because you work with a multi-channel distribution strategy. But at the end of the day, you either use a capable channel manager on one side, or you have the PMSs with good integrations. And I mean, the PMSs in Europe, they have all more than just the 4 channels integrated. They also have additional direct channels integrated. And I believe there is still opportunities out there. Is a smaller channel going to compete with an OTA? The answer is clearly no, right? So they can't have the same spend on performance marketing, online marketing, Google, etc., etc. But they can potentially address certain niches, languages, cultures, whatever it might be, that will maybe allow you to get a booking at a lower cost than what you pay as a commission to a larger channel as well.
I'm glad you brought up travel agencies too, because we've talked to quite a few people recently that I feel like the travel agency boom is coming back, that there's more ways for travel agencies to access vacation rental inventory, which is an exciting thing. I mean, I know Annie and I were going, and you too, Simon, we're all going to Scale Italia in October in Florence. And I went back to my old travel agent that I used probably 10 years ago to help book our flights and start planning that trip. There's definitely value in still having those connections. But do you see overseas, or a lot of the property management companies, do they have those relationships with travel agencies?
Well, I don't know why you asked this question because I'm sitting in a travel agency today, right? So,
The answer is
Touche.
yes.
when we, just for the audience, when we started the call, I had to choose a background, so I choose that. So that's it.
And that's the big announcement. Simon's starting a travel agency.
Well, I would do many things, Alex, but I would not open a travel agency. I mean,
No.
I've been a digital guy for a long time, but it's an interesting question. It's definitely a very interesting question. So I learned with Interhome how distribution through travel agencies work. And you could ask, why did that not fly over time? I can make it, my observation was always it was easier for travel agency to sell a packaged trip to Spain for 2 weeks holidays and a flight than selling a single home to an owner and get maybe even less commission, right? That was 20 years ago. So it was clear that we were still printing catalogs like crazy. Advertising costs were massive. So we pulled that out of the travel agency business very quickly. The second piece or reason at the time was, how do you make the inventory available through the GDSs, right? So GDSs who provide flight content, hotel content, vacation rental was sort of never able to make its content available through GDSs like Amadeus and Travelport and other of the large GDSs. And this is where the travel agency could not find the inventory to actually make it easy for them to sell. But what you said, I also believe so. In a certain vertical in our industry, I see massive opportunity that vacation rental will come back as well, but more in the luxury and upper market segments. If that inventory is well aggregated and made technological available through like a type of GDS, I think this could be significant and make it attractive for travel agencies because they now are here and they have customers who demand vacation rental, but they don't know where to start to look for it. And if that inventory is made available technology, I totally believe that vacation rental within travel agency can have travel advisors and travel consultants who can work online will definitely have comeback. It's no question for me.
I'm actually really excited because it's one of the things at Next Packs that we're doing is an integration to get to GDS. And that was the very first question I asked because when I was in property management, it was how do we get to GDS? Because there's meeting planners or group planners that's where they go to. They have a travel agent that does group travel for them and like for companies and those type of things. So for the urban markets, like GDS is going to open a whole new world of business travel to them that has been fairly to this point locked up by the hotel segment. So not that the hotels aren't seeing losses over to short-term rentals. It's just going to make it more readily available for somebody who's booking a convention into a city to be able to offer some of these accommodations. So I think to your point, being able to list short-term rentals on GDS is going to give another option out there. And the travel agencies do speak to an elevated type of traveler, one who's staying longer, spending more, buying, higher value accommodation. So it'll be good for the industry to kind of get out into that world. And Alex and I have talked to quite a few people lately that the travel agents are starting to sort of come back up. And I think they want to be part of it. I mean, we always joke about, where short-term rentals is where all the cool kids are. And the travel agents have kind of been the last ones to enter the cool kids space. So we're happy to have them, I think.
We'll be back in just a minute after a word from our premier brand sponsor, HostAway. Buying a new property management system can be a daunting task. We get it. Researching, implementing, and onboarding new software can be time-intensive and costly. And there's always that lingering fear that the product might not deliver on its promises. But for short-term property managers, there's a game changer in the industry.
That's right. HostAway is the fastest growing and top rated property management system for short-term rental property managers. And for good reason.
HostAway doesn't just streamline your operations, it makes you more money. Thousands of HostAway users have quickly realized their return on investment with profitability boosting features like
increased bookings through multi-channel distribution, cutting out commission by driving guests to your own direct booking website, and increased revenue per reservation through offering tasteful upsells.
Plus, with HostAway's new dynamic pricing feature, you can increase revenue per listing by 20% without worrying that you're leaving money on the table or pricing yourself out of the market.
Listeners of Alex and Annie podcast can onboard HostAway for only $100. That's $400 off the regular onboarding fee. Visit get.hostaway.com/Alex and Annie for a demo and to learn more.
Ready to go pro? Learn why thousands of property managers are using HostAway to take their vacation rental business to the next level.
Visit get.hostaway.com/Alex and Annie and get started today.
I think one of the more interesting things that we've heard just recently, OwnerPoint and Rentals has done a pretty cool program where they've basically made it so that travel agents or companies, if you want to be able to book other inventory, they have a white label system that's all tied into the properties that distribute to rentals. And I guess they're having a lot of luck with that with travel agencies, that they want that availability to that inventory, which I thought that was a unique way of driving more business through their whole process there of the rentals group. When we look at these OTAs and the ones that just they're not really producing a whole lot, I think that's an interesting strategy to be able to drive additional business through those relationships.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I think one additional piece that is now missing in this conversation is what do we do with corporates? And how can we make that inventory also accessible? I mean, Alto Vita is one that has said, okay, we're connecting the STR with the corporate world, which I thought was an incredible, great initiative, but it's still underserved because now you have the opportunity to do midterm rentals for the former so-called digital nomads and people who are traveling more flexible, and that's happening more and more and more. And that market is still not well enough served. That's for me another additional opportunity that people need to wrap their head around. How can we get engaged, even in the leisure industry, more with the corporate side of the business and longer stays for people who travel and are more flexible in terms of where they stay and how long they stay? That's still an opportunity in our industry of the property management business that is still not well served either next to the travel industry. I totally agree.
Yeah. Well, switching gears, Simon, we also want to get your take on what is going on with acquisitions and mergers. I think this has been an interesting year that we talked about it last year on this episode that we started to hear about companies thinking, okay, maybe this is a good time for me to sell. I've certainly heard a lot more of that this year. And I think on the other side of that, there's also a lot of appetite from companies that want to buy, and they're looking for companies that might be in that position. But just curious what you're hearing on your side and also on the technology side of the acquisitions.
Yeah, absolutely. And happy to dive in here. So we differentiate two pieces. One is technology and the other one is the PMC, the short-term rental property management side of the business. In terms of tech, we see a significant ramp up of consolidation within the tech landscape. Everybody out there is familiar with the AJL technology landscape. 420 companies. There's probably only 400 left in the meantime. Yes, we see new startups. Yes, we do see new technologies. But I think in the core, next to the PMS, the consolidation is going to take place. I mean, TouchStay was one of the transactions that we did, but at the moment, we have over more than a dozen live deals, and half of that is tech, and the other half is property management business. So let's talk about tech for a second. I think one thing we will see more and more as the all-in-one solution, end-to-end PMSs are evolving. I think we see more smaller vertical companies looking for an exit for add-ons, guest comms, operations, whatever it might be. There's so many tiny verticals that is now very hard for them to, first of all, spend the money to get customers. Secondly, complexity for property managers have become increasingly more difficult dealing with technology. And so I think the smaller type vertical businesses will be out there and being consolidated by the largest ones. We have seen a lot of acquisitions by Guesty, for example, acquiring channel managers like Rentals United. We've seen Hostaway raising an enormous amount of capital. We've seen smaller companies who are now looking at being taken over and added to a value proposition of a tech space. So I think that is happening. What does that mean on valuation? I think valuation is still a big challenge, but at the same time, a lot of investors like venture capital are not willing to put additional capital into some of their assets. So they rather look for exit opportunities versus putting more money in. Marketing has become challenging. There's endless conferences out there. There's endless money can be spent and everybody runs after the same customers. That's super hard. So consolidation in tech will continue, but valuations are not massively high and rather compressed, but now it's a buyer's market. I would say that clearly on the tech side. On the PMC side, it really depends on geography, destination, units, quality of properties, etc., etc. There's a lot of buyers. There's a lot of mid-sized companies who are looking to add on more portfolio. It's actually, the market is more fluid than what I think, than what I expected. And also, one of the reasons I see behind that is people see some gray clouds on the horizon. It's becoming more tougher. The great years, 21, 22, and probably 23 are over. And now we're seeing the market more softening, leveling out to the 19 levels. And people sort of think, hey, I don't want to have another COVID year, so I get rid of it. And this is not driven by valuation. This is simply by, hey, I don't want to go through this again. And now maybe it's a good opportunity to sell. And there's people who are acquisitive, smaller. In the past, we always talked about V-Trips and Vacasa and all these guys. But now we're talking solid regional players who have made good money, who are looking to add on more properties. And the same happens in Europe. It's not the big boys, essentially, like Sykes or Ways, who want to make acquisitions. By the way, Sykes hasn't made an acquisition in 12 months, apart from their forest business that they've acquired. And this really shows that also mid-sized companies who have been able to increase profitability are looking to make transactions. So no matter if the market is on a high or on a low, the M&A activities is always pretty consistent.
So if you were to look towards 2025, what do you think the landscape's going to be for the same topic, mergers and acquisitions? Do you think it's going to continue to grow? Do you think it's going to stall out? I mean, there's a lot of speculation out there that, in the US specifically, a lot of it hinges on how our presidential election goes, where things end up happening. But what are your thoughts?
From where I am at right now, together with our customers and our bandwidth, we're not even past the next month yet, to be perfectly honest. And 25 is for us a super long time to think about.
It does feel like a long time right now.
Election year. I mean, it's interesting to see what's going on in the US, to say the least.
Yeah.
I think we have so many unknowns. Me being European, and we probably look a little bit different through the lens in how we view the world with China, with Russia, with everything else that's going out there, being a lot closer also here in Europe, I think we're taking a more cautious approach in terms of what's really going to happen. If we can continue to have a certain political, macroeconomical stability, then I'm not foreseeing significant changes. Definitely not massive growth. I think we're going more horizontal right now overall within our industry. But I think we have some significant events such as the election, but also others over here in relation to war in Israel and whatever that can have a significant impact economically. And we need to be ready for those. So without giving a more defined outlook on 25, I think we just need to remain quite flexible and be close to our businesses to maneuver to any changes that arise. And M&A is always going to continue to be there, especially in a highly fragmented industry like ours, without a doubt. But is it now a seller's market or a buyer's market for 25? I think for me, this is too early to predict.
In terms of fragmentation and moving pieces and parts, the conference topic is pretty fragmented. There's a lot going on there. And Alex and I have been very fortunate and been asked to be part of, again, she referenced it, the Scale Italia in the fall. And so we're getting a deeper dive into what it looks like for conferences in Europe versus the US. And obviously you come to the US a lot and I think you're doing a conference, and I believe you said Australia is what we talked about, or you have done it in Australia. So you have a pretty good lens on conferences globally. What do you think the conferences need to be doing to get more engagement? Because I feel like that's where everybody's lacking, is trying to get more people involved, but it's just from a vendor perspective, a supplier perspective, it's gotten so cost prohibitive that we really have to pick and choose what we're doing, but we obviously want to support and be part of it all. But, where do you think we go to make the industry diverse without being too diluted?
Yeah, great question. We could have a podcast simply on conferences. If I wouldn't be a married man and father of 5, I mean, I would pack my bag probably in 2 weeks and come back at the end of November, right? So
Yeah.
That's how it feels right now. And I think that's a total overkill. So the way we look at it at AJL, we're going to new conferences and we're supporting new conference emerging markets. So this year I'm going to Colombia, Medellin. I'm moderating Brisbane for 2 days as an MC. In Australia, we're doing Mexico. We're doing the first conference in Germany this year in October. I'm supporting. So we are looking for new opportunities at AJL, also to interact into evolving markets and markets who are getting more involved. Because and don't get that wrong, ladies, while I love to have a drink with you on the bar in somewhere in the US, which is fantastic, but that's not really helping you, and it's not helping us either, right? And it's not helping the industry. And I think we have seen too many the same. And one thing I had to learn in 23, I don't need to suffer from FOMO. If I'm not there, the world doesn't go down, but people still go and still meet. I think we need to be mindful of what can the conferences do, how to address new players to the industry. We always come back and say, what's the percentage of the membership of VRMA in relation to market? It's still tiny. And that is in other markets the same. I can go to Scale all day long, and don't get me wrong, I love Gianpaolo and I love Damien. But if, at the end of the day, I can have a beer with them anytime, but I don't need to go to a conference. What I'm saying is that we're seeing always the same people. And I think that is the challenge here. And that's why we at AJL are very focused on new formats, on new destinations, where we enter new markets, where we can get a different perspectives. And I think the conferences, to be perfectly honest, they don't need to build on the same common network all the time, because you go to these conferences and you always meet the same people wherever you go. That is not driving value to vendors. And I think that's a massive challenge. So I think conference organizers really need to think, how can I address a larger piece of the market that is less familiar with the professional STR industry? And that's why we at AJL are really supporting conferences like this in Australia or in Colombia, because they're on the move and they're bringing these communities together. And that's where we want to be.
Yeah. And I think, the regional conferences, there's a lot to be said about their approach and how they're reaching people that aren't necessarily going to VRMA International or some of the bigger conferences. And, Annie and I were just on a phone call yesterday. We're going to the Northwest chapter of Favor in a couple weeks and going to be speaking with Rebecca Ballard and giving a market update and kind of like a live podcast interview there. But I've been to that event before, and it's typically, it's like 50 to 75 people. They're people that you don't normally see at the bigger events, and, it's free. So it's easy to get people to go to that. On the other hand, also Favor in September that's in Orlando. I just registered for that one. The registration was $123. I mean, you can't beat that. And when I went to that one a few years ago, I think there was probably, a couple hundred, maybe a little bit more than that. So those events, I think, have a lot of opportunity to grow regionally for the people that they're not going to fly their entire team and stay in a hotel and expenses and everything else, but you still have to reach the people. I think that's one of the concerns is, okay, if you say we're going to do an event in a big destination where there's still a lot of people that they don't go to the larger events, you still have to reach those property managers and you have to get in front of them. And I think that kind of takes a little bit of a grassroots effort of, just spreading the word. But I think we're going to see more of those pop up as time goes on.
I totally agree. And that's exactly what I meant. So it's like we need to see, and the more established events really need to think about, how can we differentiate and make it still attractive for people to come? Because I think, to be honest, sponsorship money is under massive pressure next year. That's, if I look at 2025 on a supply side outlook in terms of sponsoring on conferences, then I trust me with all these conferences that are out there right now. I think also tech companies have understood that there is other ways of spending their marketing spend than going to conferences that will bring them more leads than what they expected. So I definitely foresee that as a change in 2025, that marketing spend on conferences is going to be reduced by vendors.
Yeah, I definitely think that the days of you're going just to be seen are not going to be in people's marketing plans anymore. It's really about, what is the ROI for it? And some shows are great ROI for, some and not so much for others. But when you go as a vendor and you're competing against somebody who is a conglomerate of technology and they have an entire aisle, it's really hard to compete with that. You don't have that kind of presence and you get lost in the crowd. So I definitely think that more regionalized offers will be more appealing to the suppliers.
Yeah. Well, Simon, it is a pleasure as always to have you on the show again today. And we're excited to see where things go the rest of this year. And of course, we always keep in touch to make sure you've got the pulse on what's going on, not just here, but internationally. And we're very excited to see you in Florence in October. So that'll be a fun event for all of us. But in the meantime, any closing thoughts or anything you want to leave our audience with?
Not at all. I mean, it's 1st of August, Swiss National Day, so we're happy to celebrate. Thank you both, Alex and Annie. It's always a great honor and pleasure to be with you and have this conversation. Time is always running too fast. I think, my thought for the last 18 months have been very consistent. While I was sharing an umbrella on stage in Florida, I still keep that up. I mean, we've seen good years. We will see some more challenging year. The industry is still fascinating and so much going on. We still have so much work to do. I love vacation rental and short-term rental. We're devoted to that industry, and I think we still have a lot of work to do, and we still have a lot of opportunities. It's a great space to be in. Just keep your eyes open.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
If anyone wants to reach out, Simon, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Simon.Lehmann, Lehmann at AJLatelier.com. Or find me on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you'll find me.
We'll put that in the show notes. That's a hard one as well. If anybody wants to contact Annie and I, you can go to alexandanniepodcast.com. And until next time, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Happy Swiss Day.